Always phone call. Okay, we're live. We are live. This is Senate Finance. We are back. We are waiting for our witness to talk about bonding. So as soon as he comes in, we will start. I think I told you everything I need to tell you.
We're looking at 39.
Yes. And I think we have heard so far is plan. And I'm not sure if it's part of the governor's proposal or not, is that to do school construction of any kind, it would be that school districts who are municipalities by definition, because they can raise taxes, who would have to go on to the bond bank where they would get a favorable rate, and then the state would help with payment grants, all of them on an annual basis, but it wouldn't tie the state to any specific grant. And Michael is out there. Well, he was, and now we've lost him. There he is. He's back. Michael, welcome. You know the routine, and just introduce yourself, and then we are just, for some of us, a refresher course. For others, this is bonding 101. So just help us understand school construction, how the bonding could or should or might work. We know we're going to have to bond, and we know we're going to have to either build or repair. So the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. And I'm just getting myself organized here so that I can share. I assume you want me to share my slides on my end for purpose of discussion.
That would be helpful. Then anyone that's watching can also see what we're talking about.
Okay, great.
And they're on our website, but up there helps.
So to start things out, I am Michael Gaughan, and I am the executive director of the Vermont Bond Bank. It's nice to see many of you, some of you in a different committee. Part of the reason I was late was I was searching for Senate Education and then remembered I was actually in Senate Finance, but I think that says a lot about what I am presenting here today.
There we go.
So, if you have been in any of the education committees, this will be a little bit redundant, but I thought it worth just going through a brief history of the bond bank for Senate Finance, because it is intertwined in this conversation. For those of you who don't know, the bond bank facilitates is essentially Vermont's infrastructure bank for units of government that include municipalities, villages, towns, and of course school districts. The sort of origination of the bond bank is entwined, as I said, in this school construction finance story. We were created in 1969, 1970 biennium. At that point in time, there had been a lot of school construction, and the local, different banking environment at that point, and the local banks were sort of all full with short-term borrowing to facilitate the school construction. And there's some vestigial parts of the statute that reflect that, such as the fact that you can roll over short-term notes, bond anticipation notes, for up to 10 years. And that was to facilitate that time period. But there was a bit of a capital crunch, and from that process, the bond bank was born. And our structure, for the most part, we have some different programs, but for the most part, what we do is we pool loans together from units of government. Then we issue bonds out in the wider market, receive economies of scale, have institutional knowledge, have market expertise, and also have credit enhancement from the state of Vermont on those bonds via a couple of mechanisms that will play into the story later. And then we pass those proceeds along to our borrowers, who received the benefit of a AA plus, AA2 rating. We, other than some very minor adjustments to account for our cash flows, essentially every borrower from a town of 800 to a town of 40,000 is receiving the same rate. And there's a tremendous amount of equity built into this, both from having equitable access to the market as well as equitable cost of capital. And so going back to 1971, our first bond deal on an inflation-adjusted basis, that was our largest deal ever and was about 270 million in today's dollars. And it was exclusively for school construction. So here we sit 50 years later, and it's kind of no surprise to us that we're talking about school construction because that was, our largest amount of school construction we ever financed was at the very beginning of history. Fast forward to today, and schools are not the majority of our portfolio. These numbers here are a little stale from last year, but school districts account for about 35% of our portfolio. Today, by the end of this week, really, will be about 650 million. And schools are, just under 200 million or so of that total. And when you put that in the context of an estimated 3 billion worth of capital needs over the next 10 years, it gives you a sense of the amount of either underinvestment or work we have to do as it relates to school construction. So as we've had since beginning in 2020, right before the COVID declaration in March, we have been part of the conversation about school construction aid. And over the last 4 years, 5 years, we've been doing a lot of work. We have significantly altered our security structure for our bonds to accommodate what we anticipate will be a large amount of borrowing. We're about to go to the market tomorrow. Included in that bond deal will be the first borrowing for the Colchester School District project, 30 million of about 100 million there. And so we've done a lot of work with our security structure, getting ready for a large amount of bond issuance, but there are sort of values or fundamentals at play that we spent some time thinking about over the course of the past few years, beginning with our participation in the school aid construction working group. I don't know if I have that name correctly, but you get the idea. Number one, they're a liability that requires a facility or a policy solution. GASB, our accounting standards board for the governmental space, is on the eve of producing new rules on capital depreciation. And not exactly sure what that's going to look like, but I think the point of it is that much like pensions were fairly new to financial reporting, unmet capital spending needs are also going to be part of financial reporting and will show up in a meaningful way on the financial statements. And so similarly, this is an unfunded liability in many ways with regards to school construction, and we think it desperately requires a policy solution because it just continues to be an unmet financial ability of that community or of that school district. One thing that we have observed, because we're on the front rows and we see our communities both from the municipal side and from the school district side, is that schools are social infrastructure with and without students. So any solution really needs to win the peace, so to speak, in terms of making use of those legacy assets. In a lot of communities, and we've obviously seen this fight over keeping a school, and it makes sense. That might be the only source of social infrastructure in that community and is this real center point. And so I think we have to acknowledge that. And from the bond bank's perspective, we want you to acknowledge that because we have towns who we lend to as well, and their health and their sustainability is also dependent on having some community assets there. So as you think about this, I would encourage you to be interdisciplinary in your thought about what we do with those legacy assets if or when it's no longer a school. So we have an economic mechanism in place, but not the political economy for financing school construction. That's what you all do. Good news is the bond banks here. We have we built the mousetrap 50 years ago, and we're ready for this challenge. And to meet this challenge, what we all really need to think about is how we leverage the state's credit rating, not through direct borrowing, but through the bond bank, more or less, where we can add a lot of leverage without as much downside risk to the state and achieve a very similar cost of capital. And I know that the proposed S39, hopefully I have that number right, anticipates that. And then one second to last point here, one of my comments on the proposed legislation is we have a small, I won't call it defect, but there's a small perfection we could make in our credit enhancement mechanism for schools, whereby the way that the dollars flow that are collected locally, if they move laterally from that local tax collector over to the school, we don't have the ability to what's called intercept those dollars. And the intercept mechanism, which is our strongest form of credit enhancement, is when if a school or a town or whomever may not pay us, we can intercept dollars due to them from the state. And this has never been used, but it exists in over 30 states and for schools, and it is the most powerful form of credit enhancement we have. And so those dollars, as we're talking about the potential for more borrowing, those dollars that move laterally from this assessor over to the school district, we don't have a means to intercept, and therefore we can't receive the benefit of that enhanced credit rating based upon that intercept. So it is one thing we point out that we think would be a natural complement to this legislation. And then finally, we're working hard by all means possible to identify low-cost sources of capital to bring to bear on this problem. And that includes our $40 million commitment from the USDA Rural Utility Service for energy efficiency lending that we secured at the end of 2024. And we're pursuing all manner of financing sources. So in other words, in thinking about how you might shape the aid, I wouldn't focus on specific needs, say related to energy efficiency or something of the like. I would just focus on the overall need in your scoring, and then we'll optimize the capital as is best for that community. It's a subtle point, but I think an important one there. So before I move on, any questions on these sort of statements of value?
Question, Michael.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Michael, it's Ruth Hardy. I don't think I understand your point about the bond bank state intercept and your recommendation there. Can you explain that a little better?
Yeah, I went really quickly. So apologies. For those veterans in the room, they can help you out also. But Middlebury, town of Middlebury. If they were not to pay us, which they never have and never will, but if they were not to pay us, we have a mechanism by which we can ask this under statute, we can ask the state treasurer to redirect state aid that would be due to them to us to backfill the debt service that they miss paying. And that is an extremely important source of credit enhancement that carries a programmatic rating from Moody's Investor Services of AA2. It's just one notch off the state's rating. So it's the most powerful tool we have. And like I say, it's most common throughout the country for schools. Over 30 states have it. What's unique in Vermont and other states that have bond banks is that we also have that intercept mechanism for municipalities as well.
So it's already an existing law. You're not asking for a law change. You're just saying, hey, we should use this. Is that right?
Yeah, it's very mechanical. So we can only intercept dollars that are, and this is my learning, but are within the vision system that transfers payments to from the state down to school districts. So if that money is moving laterally, not through the state, but from the town of Middlebury over to the school district, but it's not going up to the state and it's not subject to the vision system, we can't intercept that. So on paper, every school, because of the Ed Fund, should have overwhelming dollars to intercept. But mechanically, that's not always the case. And it's not really a problem right now because because we don't have a lot of debt. But as that amount grows, this is going to become more important.
Okay, so the money, essentially the town of Middlebury collects the property taxes that are education property taxes for taxpayers in Middlebury, and the town transfers it to the school district. It never actually goes through the state, even though technically, it goes through the state because it's part of the ed fund, but it's not making that, the funds aren't making that full route.
Right.
That's exactly right.
I get it. Okay, thank you.
So you need language that would let you intercept that? Or you have that?
Yes. In an
Okay.
ideal world, we'd have that. We don't want to make anyone's life more complicated than it needs to be, and potentially that could be an opt-in structure. I know that this was a source of some tension a few years back. I think so long as the taxes continue to be collected at the local level through the municipal tax collectors, I think you will face less resistance, perhaps. But it is, I think, an important part of this story that's technical, but not to be missed.
Okay. Do you have any proposed language?
I don't. I have to admit that the chapters on tax collection are beyond our scope for the most part.
We'll talk to our tax drafter, and he'll perhaps be in touch with you. Okay, keep going. Got that?
Okay, well, I'm gonna give you some graphics. This was a lot of text. So just to give another sense of perspective on the history of school construction finance in Vermont, and this is 90% of the story because of the bond bank. Most schools in particular go through the bond bank for their financing, but it's voluntary, so there may be things that aren't reflected in this. But at least as it relates to the bond bank, the orange color there is inflation adjusted as of fall 2024, and the blue are the nominal dollars. And you can see there. The one exception is we did include Burlington and Winooski in here who did not go through the bond bank, but they are reflected in this data. And so you see there that the 70s were quite a time of school construction, and then I think there's sort of the technical schools, as I understand, in the 90s that account for some of that activity. We don't differentiate the two, and then very very quiet up until 2020 or so.
Okay. Committee questions?
I might go ahead. Senator, oh, I'm sorry.
Go.
Thank you, Chair. It's Senator Buick here. I know you and I had talked because I was curious what you knew about the plan that's being unveiled and unrolled in the state and how this could play with, all of the variables that are coming out at us week to week. But it sounds as though you're not too well informed as to what's going on at this point. Is that correct?
Not yet. I haven't had any direct conversations with the administration on that plan. There is a parallel to the school consolidation that we observed or experienced, in which both the articles of incorporation, the uniform articles of incorporation, as well as those that were adopted locally, did have an assumption of liabilities, and that was an important point of diligence for us. So that essentially we just changed the borrower ID on our end, and then that new district assumes the debt, the legacy debt. Now, moving forward, that's a different story. Yeah, that's about all I can speak to at this point.
And could be extremely significant because do you have a map of where the debt is in the state by any chance? Sorry.
Yeah, I do. We kind of map it by county.
That would
I know
be
that's your counties, Senator Hardy, counties are what they are for better or worse, but it gives us one indication of how we balance population versus the amount of debt we have. So we certainly have that map that way.
That would be helpful because I think that people are not really aware of the fact that this would be a huge debt transfer to some parts of the state because I think the school construction debt is really focused on Chittenden County.
Just the one.
Well, I'd have to look at those numbers before speaking. I mean, certainly like the way the Ed Fund works right now, we're sort of all paying for it, right? I don't know that that is necessarily different in some ways, but you know, it all depends on how that foundational grant, I suppose, is shaped.
Okay, Senator Chittenden.
I have a question along these same lines. I don't know if you'll have a response to it, but one of the concerns I have with the current landscape in Vermont is that the new construction is more a function of the local appetite of the voters of that school district than it is on need and the condition of the buildings and facilities. I wonder if you would overlay that concern with anything you've seen in what we saw in the 70s and what we're seeing today, and how restarting this program, if the state might have more of an active role in prioritizing funds towards the districts that are in the most need of updated facilities for safety, efficiency, as well as depth of curriculum offerings.
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. I'm going to try to stick to how it impacts the bond bank. We observe the same thing. We see school districts that are of very high depreciation ratios continually fail on their efforts to pass a vote. We also see school districts that are honestly trying to bend themselves in a pretzel, figuring out how they financially engineer upgrades to their facilities because they're afraid of going to voters and the expectation that that vote will fail. And they don't want to endanger their overall budget for that reason. And those are real problems for everything that, you know, all the reasons you know about. Where I think the question becomes really complicated and interesting for us is when you have schools that somehow make it out of this scrum and get a bond vote passed, but they're in a location that suffers acutely from the demographic challenges of the state, and they're asking for, say, a 30-year loan, and you're looking at enrollment and you're seeing you know, year-over-year declines, and you're looking at the population under 18, and you're also seeing that same decline. And then we get ourselves, you know, we try to be agnostic to policy decisions, but we get ourselves, because of a credit decision, in a place where we're thinking about policy. And so I think in those instances is where you, on one hand, we celebrate that those folks are able to improve their school and provide better outcomes for their children. But on the other hand, we have a lot of concerns about renovating a school in a location that may not exist in 15 years, even though we're doing 30-year financing. And so that's really where the tension lies, and where we'd like to see some thoughtful work from you all around the criteria that go into new construction versus renovation. Hopefully that was a diplomatic enough answer, but that is, I think that is where we see the tension.
We will
Very good answer. Thank you.
record that.
Thomas is smiling.
Okay. Okay, other questions? I've sent a note to Kirby telling him that at some point we will need intercept language.
I think he
And
has
can
more
talk to me.
slides.
You have more slides, okay.
Let me just give you two more interesting things, and I have just one more specific comment on the legislation as it stands today, if that's okay.
Yes.
So I just want to give you, you know, I'm preaching to the chorus, whatever you want to say, in terms of our underinvestment in our school facilities. But one thing we do is we look at both statewide and national benchmarks for financial ratios. And it's not perfect, but it gives us some understanding as how we compare to other states. And I know, you know, many folks have studied this from different angles, but this is a financial perspective. This is as of these are 2024 medians, which is based on 2023 data. So it's, you know, getting a little stale. But if you look at long-term debt for the bond bank school portfolio, it's the median amount is $2 million. That compares to Moody's, who has a national perspective. If you look at their A-rated schools between 1,000 and 5,000 students of enrollment, that's 26 million. Similarly, if you look at debt service as a percent of revenue, our median is 1.4%, and the Moody's median is almost 6%. So that's we've got a number of different ways in which we look at our deficiency. Certainly the school conditions facilities report is the best example, but this is another perspective on sort of underinvestment and what we could expect to see in terms of how it impacts school budgets if we were to start funding that unmet liability. And then finally, and I think those of you from Senate Education have heard me talk about this, the one piece in the proposed legislation that I suggest adding are advisors for alternative delivery mechanisms of school construction. If we're to try and envision one modest upside to our let me back up. Typically, we did our largest school construction deal in 1971, and that was 270 million inflation adjusted. Those schools are all of the same vintage, which is why this problem is so large right now, is that you have everything reaching the end of its useful life at the exact same time, which is part of why this is so painful. But that also presents a modest opportunity in that you are going to be procuring billions of dollars of school construction at the same time. So how do you leverage that demand to the best outcome, given overlapping infrastructure projects that are underway, housing projects that are underway, and a limited pool of contractors? And hopefully they stay busy, because last thing we want is for them to be interested in this because there's no other work. But I do think it lends itself towards either design build or like some sort of P3 alternative delivery mechanism. The bond bank is always going to have the better cost of capital. So in these discussions, the financing aspect of a P3 is not going to be worth your time, but the consolidated delivery and the central source of procurement might be worth your time.
Wait, Michael, what's a P3?
Yeah, it has like way too many definitions, but one is that it's the most common definition is a public-private partnership, which named to me something in government that is not a public-private partnership. But regardless, it has a defined name in the physical and social infrastructure space in which you are providing some sort of long-term commitment to a private party to deliver some infrastructure at a cost, and there's a discussion and a negotiation around risk share. And so I would just encourage you to think about this, given we have so many schools to be built at one time. It's not going to work well for renovations because those are so unique, but it could work really well on new construction.
Okay, Sandra.
All I was gonna add to that was that we did, Michael, I don't know if you remember this, but in our school construction working group this summer, we did look at P3s, and I think we just decided that it was way too big for us to take up in the couple of meetings that we had. But you gave us some great information that I still have somewhere, and it's pretty compelling, as a possibility.
Yeah, and I think all that we would need potentially in this legislation is similar to how you have pre-qualification for the I think it was engineers and architects maybe. You would do something similar for alternative delivery consultants, and then maybe you might even want Ledge Council to at a later point make sure our statute can accommodate P3s. VTrans uses these all the time. So certainly from that perspective, it works, but I think we just want to make sure it could work here.
Michael, what does public-private partnership mean in the context? I don't understand. I mean, I know what it means sort of colloquially, whatever, but in this context, what does it mean?
Yeah, so I think the way we're observing these projects to work, Winooski, Colchester, Burlington, is that you have a design, and I'm speaking a little out of school, but I'm doing it in the interest of
No pun
this.
intended.
this massively expensive issue, and just how do we make sure we're exploring all options to drive down the cost? So in those schools in Chittenden County, you've got design, bid, build. Each school is bespoke. They are, certainly learning from each other, but they are pursuing their own process in each one of those instances. The suggested legislation speaks to having design templates, and what we'd be saying in this instance is sort of institutionalizing that by saying, okay, we've got five schools we want to build, or 20 schools, whatever, and we are going to procure on a consolidated basis design build contracts to deliver those schools at X price. And we want these certain amenities. We want this, solar orientation. We want these energy efficiency components. But then the design build provider, and there's certainly a lot of national firms and great local firms as well that specialize in school construction. You deliver to us at X price, and you absorb the construction risk of delivering those schools at X price. In return for that, we don't get as bespoke a project. And so if you were doing one school or two schools, this, is a national firm going to mobilize to move people to Vermont and help out with those issues? I don't know. But you got a couple $1 billion worth of procurement. I think it starts to be worth considering.
Okay,
Okay.
interesting.
Multi-design build contracts. I don't think anyone's thought that.
Well, now we
way or
have.
massively before. But yeah, we rebuilt all but Granite Street Bridge in Montpelier is one of two that survived the 27 flood. So all the other bridges got replaced in 27, and they all went bad about 1990. Because they all got built at the same time, and you've seen that with the schools.
I think one thing
So-
about the P3, oh, now I have a new term. Senator Maltos and I, we're gonna see each other in the hall, we're gonna go PPP. The Vermonters love bespoke things. Don't you think? Like bespoke, like customized, tailored, Vermontized and all that stuff. So that might be a tough sell unless we can put parameters around it that is.
Oh.
Yeah, I think the deal.
Go ahead,
I think the
Michael.
deal you potentially make, I think the upside of doing this is you say, okay, district, we're going to handle procurement for you and deliver you X school, and you are going to pay Y. And because we have done a risk transfer of the potential cost overruns, we know that you can pay Y. And that's the trade. And that's why I think it might be appealing.
And we're
Got it.
gonna help you pay your debt service.
Okay,
And I will say, I appreciate in the draft legislation the way that the subsidy was would work. What we discovered in, looking at the Rhode Island example, which is a good one, is that we can hold harmless the state's credit rating if we can run the debt service subsidy through the bond bank and do it after the schools pay their debt service payment. That works really efficiently and accomplishes the same end, and at least as the rating criteria stand right now, holds the state harmless, which is what we want to do from a ratings perspective.
so can I ask another question?
Yes.
So, what I heard was the intercept and that the intercept language and then possibly some language about the ability to use P3. Are there other suggestions you have for the bill, which S39?
Not at this moment.
Okay.
Which S39 will probably end up getting attached to
Yeah, but
whatever our maker
it's
education.
the language right now. So if you do have anything, let us know.
Okay, I'll do my best, but it is a part of the statute that's not my area of expertise.
Senator Chipman?
Since we have you here, and this is a broad question, I understand that from my municipal perspective, there's usually a bonding capacity, an upward limit, a boundary. Do you have any comments on the state of Vermont's upward boundary of bonding capacity? Not that I'm looking to reach it, but we do maintain such a good bond rating to be able to fund important things like schools. And so this is something that I, as one of 180 legislators, fully support us committing to and using our bonding capacity to build schools in Vermont over the next 10 years. How much can we borrow?
Yeah, so yeah, again, just kind of reiterating the way we discussed it in the state aid task force and the way it's been discussed in subsequent ways, would not rely on the state issuing more debt to support the schools. The subsidy would flow through the bond bank. So the question really is one of what's the debt capacity of those districts that are benefiting from that bond. And that is where it gets kind of starts to be a circular reference, but because of Vermont's unique structure. So you have sort of two components of that. One is what the market will absorb. The bankers have told us that there's no upward limit on that when we approach them with a couple $1 billion, but obviously they've got some self-interest there. So then the question becomes like, what is the willingness to pay? And at what point do you start crowding out other investments within that school budget? From a practical matter, because of the strength of the ed fund, basically being that of, I mean, the credit of the ed fund is really that of the state. So we have a lot of comfort with that. And when we underwrite schools, we're looking at demographics and we're looking at liquidity, because those are the two things that concern us. We're not so much concerned with the tax revenue being raised for the most part. Certainly passing budgets is an important thing to do to actually get the money. So those are the things we're looking at. That willingness to pay question, that's like the theoretical one that's impossible to answer and is obviously has disparate answers around the state that's causing all the equity issues.
If I can add on. So adding on to that, in the contemplated notions floating about, be it 5 districts, be it 11, whatever, in a new district world, how much should we consider or not consider current debt loads by school districts within those contemplated districts in this possible configuration? Is that negligible?
In everywhere other than Chittenden County, yes. Our debt levels are so low as compared to national medians. It's almost not even worth thinking about. Existing debt, that is. Now, what the need is, that starts to become more important in terms of how much of the overall budget do you want to be occupied by new debt.
Okay. First, we have to decide where the school districts are.
Right.
Any other questions from Michael?
This was really helpful, Michael. Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Very
Happy to talk anytime.
It's always fun to watch you nerd out on this stuff.
And we'll
That's kind of you.
get done.
Do you have anything after this, or could I do one more question?
You can do one more question, then we're going to talk.
Be it that I represent Chittenden County and that your comment there is the caveat to Chittenden County. I doubt you are aware of this, but yesterday we were presented a 11 district model, which had an East and West Chittenden, which effectively had South Burlington, Colchester, and Milton as the West Chittenden, and then the rest would be East Chittenden, which would be CVU, MMU, and that's it.
No, there were 3.
When you said but for Chittenden County, what comes to mind as to if we did want to consider any lines in this districting relative to current debt loads? Any other additional commentary would be welcome as somebody who cares deeply about Chittenden County and the whole state, but it is my constituency.
And I do live in Burlington. I'm just pretty objective about that comment. The only place where you're going to see ratios that are equivalent to what we see nationally in terms of debt service to revenue are in Chittenden County, because that's where the votes have passed. And that's my own. I think that'd be the only comment I have at this point.
Okay. We didn't have a whole lot of choice with Burlington.
No, she did.
Yes.
Yeah.
No. Okay. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you. Take care.
You too.
Oh,
So I'm thinking about that. There's about 300 million. Right, about 200 in Burlington, 50 something in Winooski, 50 something in Colchester. That's 300 million. That means Milton and South Burlington probably doing that.
Well. Yeah, draw the lines there, don't
No, but in yesterday's.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I found it interesting that West Chittenden and Central Vermont seem to stay somewhere around 15 to 14% of every grant they put us on. It was,
A good population. Just
Yeah.
kind of averages.
yeah, it's, yeah, 89.
So we need bigger districts.
You want to tell us, you had a map,
I have a whole, I have printed out a bunch of maps.
you could,
And I thought we
bunch of
could,
maps.
we could put them on the whiteboard or something.
You can use your whiteboard.
Yay!
Oh, well,
You're gonna take
I
papers.
figured out, I think you're gonna have to put them up with magnets, the other side. I think. Ah, okay. But the discussion, and I guess I don't think any of these maps have it, because I don't know if we know.
What?
We saw students yesterday. I'm trying to figure out. So we do mapping. Somebody said, find out where the kids are. You're expert from,
I said that.
you said
I
that.
said that because that we need to be paying attention to essentially how people and where people live in the state when we're looking at the districts, because the kids are currently going to school. You know, they're in schools right now, and people are living in the state, and people are their parents are driving to work, presumably. They're not telecommuting. So some of it also is like, how do we create school districts that, you know, coalesce well with where people are, right?
Yeah.
And sort of the population centers and the demographic information that we started to look at yesterday. And what are those projections into the future? So we don't build a school that 20 years from now, nobody's going to be living there, or very fewer people are living there. I don't know.
Today and tomorrow.
Yeah, and they're so it's, we've been so focused on grand list value that I think we're missing other perspectives. And I think debt is one of them, but also reserves, because there are districts that have reserves. And they might be the opposite, the districts that have the debt and then the districts that.
Well, I'm looking at the long-term daily membership that Julia gave us yesterday. Addison's the lowest.
Lowest on what?
And Central Vermont is the highest in that one.
To your point, Senator Hardy, I've been me personally, I've been deferential to the districting a lot to the ed committee, because I feel like it needs to be decided based on student ed policy, what makes the most sense. But I think it has been germane to our discussions
Yeah.
regarding grand lists and now that discussion. So I think we can't just yield entire.
Absolutely. No, I agree. I mean, I think it's important that we're talking about it. I just think it is not even just like it's also a geography problem, you know?
We need a GIS.
Well, I feel that the House committee is doing interactive map. The ed
That's what I heard
committee
too.
in the House is working on interactive maps. So they are doing that work. But we're gonna have to look at it in terms. But I would say it sounds like the debt is in Chittenden West.
Burlington, Colchester, soon as.
Chittenden West, yeah.
Chittenden West is also like the economic driver.
Yes,
But being South Burlington, my hometown, and Milton being the two towns that have not recently passed large debt, it certainly is a factor in our minds as we think about
It's
it.
my alma mater.
It'd be the whole state. But if Winooski, Burlington, Colchester have consumed all of the debt capacity for that potential district, that's where I think it's a relevant discussion to consider.
But I wonder, based on what Michael was just saying, if the way that I don't think I fully understand it, but the debt load wouldn't be centralized to the future debt load, not the current debt load, but the future debt load would be more spread out over the state if it's sort of
run on district.
run through basically
It's the concern.
you know, the PPP thing that, you know, we're getting 20 schools out of this kind of package.
E3.
E3, thank you.
But so, all right, that's very much the concern, because if it's to the district, not concern is too strong of a word, but balancing interest.
Right,
Because that district would already be.
right.
But in some ways, it's easier if the present debt is centralized in one district because you've now built your schools. So you're gonna pay off your debt. We've got all the rest of the state whose roofs are leaking, whose buildings are 50 years old, and were built for the student population in 1970, and it's been declining since 1990. So those schools are now too large and they're old, but they aren't big enough to house the school students in the next town.
Right.
So
But the
We-
living centers.
we either put a lot of money into bracing up some schools that are probably at the end of their lifespan. Or, because I doubt that we did the highest end construction either then, being publicly bonded people.
The construction technology wasn't very good back then.
No, and we've got, I've been told they do modular apartment buildings. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't do modular schools somewhere.
Justin, some really
Yeah.
concerns.
Then you can put it on the foundation. Can't say slab in the state, but first we've got to decide the districts. Then we've got to get the districts to be willing with state support to take on the debt.
What we need, I think, is this slide 6 that Michael gave us. We're gonna need that on a district basis, so we can see who's leveraged and who's not, or over leveraged.
So I hate to be Chittenden County centric, but it is the economic engine of the state, by many people call it. And what I would say is, and I don't want a 20 pupil district, but at the same time, I wonder if there's like a district with 2 sub-district, because I could imagine a world where Chittenden County might want to not necessarily pool debt capacity, but also resources. So physical resources, where I think of continuing education facilities and so on. I'd hate to have this arbitrary line cut up right up through our county when there really are so geographically proximate that that would create an arbitrary barrier between sharing resources.
Regionalization.
Well, that's exactly why I feel like there's got to be a broader conversation and more time going into creating these districts, because we arbitrarily create lines that we think, oh, well, this is a good way of dividing it, but there's something I haven't thought of then.
But we aren't doing that. The education committees are doing that. We can adjust, alter, or change once we see what they come up with. So we need to have enough background. But they're spending a lot of time working on it. Once they do that, then, and once they start talking about schools and optimum numbers in schools and all the rest of it, our job is to figure out how to pay for it. And that's going to be a challenge. And so far, just looking at the map, the VSBA that we looked at yesterday looks like the most reasonable. We could chop up some of West Chittenden and give it to East Chittenden.
In South Rotonia, that's like South Chittenden and North Chittenden. They really do.
The
You
what,
put the
one
Milton
of
in
the,
east, because Milton and Essex Westford and Center.
Yeah, I mean,
one of the far left is tech ed districts.
Okay. I agree that I don't think this is necessarily where we should be focused on, but the committee doing it should hear about our bonding debt capacity concerns as well
Oh,
as
yeah.
grant list factors. That needs to be part of that discussion. I
Yeah.
think it's summer committee on districting.
And we will,
I'm on it. I'll be there.
we'll be there.
What about,
Got nothing else.
is there a way we can do school construction that looks at the state as a whole as like the school district? So you can utilize the entire state's ability to bond
Well,
and
that's,
then have a competitive process where this area needs it, that area needs it, not, oh, West Chittendon's already tapped out because of prior decisions or
It's
Yeah,
not-
it makes a
window.
lot of sense if you can do it.
It sounds like that's kind of what Michael was.
yeah, I think because you're going through the municipal bond bank and because we don't put the full faith and credit of the state there because the state is not taking on the local debt.
Right.
And if we did, it would blow our bond rating because
Right.
they've cut back on the amount of debt we're allowed to issue this year.
But if it's looked at as like a single school district and not,
Well,
For
I
capital
think,
construction only,
right?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I
Well,
don't
and I
know
think-
if that's possible.
well,
We
that's
can
what it
ask
kind
him.
of sounded, and maybe I didn't quite understand what he was saying, but like driving it all through the bond bank. And then having the ability to do these kind of multi-district contracts through the triple P.
Three.
Oh, I thought you were making a joke. Coming up with the new one.
I actually like can't keep remembering it. Whatever it is,
TPP. Wow.
Public-private partnership.
partnership, then. And then the risk is sort of shared across districts and backed up by the bond bank and their ability to like,
Well, it's backed up by the ed fund.
backed up by the.
Because
Right,
if they need the money, they have the authority to raise taxes to pay it. That makes it a very secure. I was going to NCOIL in the days when Harrisburg declared bankruptcy. And let me tell you, that sent shockwaves through the insurance people. Because if taxing entities could just say, I'm sorry, we're not taxing to pay our bills. It could blow, it just blew everything.
yeah,
And that didn't continue. And we get a good rate because you basically have the full faith and credit of the ed fund behind you, which is the state ed fund. So it's pretty secure. Plus Vermont has a really good reputation for paying its bills.
and then if he and the bond bank have, we provide them the ability to do intercept, then they can
Yes, if we do that,
grab it.
they've never had to,
Which
and
I
they've
think-
never gone belly up on them.
It might be a good idea. Well, another layer I think we really need to look into, maybe GovOps can help us with this is. You know, the school district decisions are made by the vote of the people. If you have a statewide capital construction district. Who's gonna make the decision, right?
Well, I mean, that's all changed. I mean, that in the governor's proposal that people would no longer be voting on school budgets
If they spent the foundation.
unless they went over it. Yes,
Yeah.
unless they went over it. So I mean, the whole concept of like, what is voters approving, what are voters approving
Additional spending
would be changed.
if they.
Yeah, and I think going from, how many do we have?
Well, I,
One school, school boards. Yeah, but each one of those school boards has like 6, 8, 10 people on them. And getting down to 5 people boards is too much culture shock for Vermont. I think we probably are gonna have to do one person, one vote prorated kind of thing like we do in the House.
Proportional
I mean, yeah, it's portioned.
You
Well,
better, you
we
gotta
have
be
to, otherwise it's not constitutional.
Yeah,
careful.
I mean, we're gonna have, I think we're gonna have to. It's like 5 is too few districts and 5 school board members. If you've got 30 towns is too few members.
Yeah.
30 is too many. So how do you work that? And
30
then-
school board members
Yeah, and
on one board.
yeah, so yeah, you need an auditorium. So how do we get those into rational form? And I'm hoping tomorrow, I asked last week if the administration would tell us how they see the money flowing. Is everything just going to those 5 people and they decide everything? Or is the money flowing there and they're going to send it down to the local school associations? And what power did they have? How did the people get a voice in? We're not going from total local control to no voice at all
I don't think any of them-
without bloodshed. I mean, I am so tired of being told that's not the Vermont way. We've got to ratchet it up, but we also have to be sensitive. Republicans can learn from the Democrats' mistakes on not being sensitive to the people's concerns.
Couple things. One, I know this is not our jurisdiction, but just for people who are interested, the House GovOps, I think both GovOps committees got a presentation from the Secretary of State's office last Friday about what would have to change for electing school board members and doing all of the sort of elections work that would have to happen in any kind of change like this. And their presentation is pretty interesting. And so they're really thinking about that kind of electoral part of it. And then there's something else you said that I wanted
Well,
to
how do we get
comment to.
How does the money get out there?
Oh, how's the money? I wonder, when are we gonna start talking about what we're doing in here and
We're
doing that?
done. That's what we're doing.
Okay. I mean, in terms of a bill,
I am told only as of yesterday, Representative Conlon hadn't seen one.
no, but our bill, like a bill that was.
No, there is a bill coming. So we will be editing, augmenting, but yeah, we're not gonna have 5 committee bills floating.
Okay. And also just so talking about bloodshed, you guys know that during the whole Act 60 conversation, a legislator's car was set on fire in the front of the state house. So just have to be,
No,
yeah, that's what I heard. That's what Mark told me.
they bought Cheryl
Yes,
Rivers, and it was, I don't think it was Act 60, it had something to do with law.
I
Anyway,
thought it was Act
they
60.
bought her car, her old
Right.
car. They hauled it down here on a truck and smashed it in front of the state
Yeah,
house.
I thought it was,
Cheryl sat in the seat, so it may well. have
I
been
thought it was Act 60.
I think it was.
Yeah.
It was hard fought, and you understand why people that went through it, like former Senator McDonald, were very wedded to their solution. But times have changed. We don't have the kids we had in 1990. The real decline was just starting then. And yeah, half our friends and neighbors or more are going to hate everything we do. That's why they pay us the big bucks and we get all the graft and privilege and free flights overseas and what else do we get around here? I'm going to shovel snow off my car all by myself.
Senator Hardy, I agree. I'm expecting this to be quite controversial and it's going to inflame, I think, the entire state. I do think that it's going to be a rough conversation. What I will say is what I personally, my opinion is what will help mitigate that is the right timeline. And
Yes.
I'm worried
Yes.
about trying to do this in a year. I'm even worried about doing it in 2 years. I
Yeah.
think a 3 to 5 year timeline, the harder and faster you push on something, the more friction you create. And I just don't think we can change this ship in a year.
No.
So that's what I'll just keep saying
Yeah,
is my.
yeah, no
Right,
one
we're
is saying
creating the
that.
right map in
Yeah.
one legislative session.
Yeah.
I just agree.
The numbers they gave us yesterday from the tax department were 2028 estimates. I mean, that it's going to be at least a 3 to 5 year. I mean,
I've gotten death threats on city council. This is just why we do this, right?
it's,
No.
This is something.
Clarity and timeline and stick to
yes,
is the only thing that's going to make a lot of people comfortable, because otherwise we're in the situation that we're in now, in which promises are made and nothing ever changes. Summer study committees perhaps are not the answer. And one of the things that we might well think about is to how these things get done is that the committees of jurisdiction actually meet periodically throughout the summer to keep this going.
I think so. I think
You just want to.
we're going to have the benchmarks that we're going to have to meet. If any of us want to have a peaceful summer at all, I think we will go home by July 1st. But I think the money committees are very likely, and the ed committees are very likely to be meeting periodically throughout the off session. I think we're going to have a big map and tell them where we think we're going. And then we're going to have to work out a transition plan because we aren't going from total local to, how do you do that? What do you do with property taxes in the meantime? If we in fact are buying down the increase this year, how many years can we buy down that increase? Because that's $100 million a year that isn't going somewhere else.
Bond for a bunch of lottery tickets.
That's probably as good as anything. Maybe this committee could all chip in and we'll all go buy a few next time the thing hits $1 billion.
Revenue does.
And if nothing else, all our money will go into the ed fund. But the we're going to have a serious discussion. And we're going to have to frame the discussion because doing nothing is not an option. We don't have the money to just keep putting money in. If we are able to curb health insurance costs, there is significant work going on that. That will help. But the entire health insurance industry, the insurers, the hospitals, the people trying to afford health insurance are in as much crisis as the education. And you put the two together, and then there's grocery prices, and then there's the unknown of what's going to happen to inflation or federal funding or anything else. We're doing this built on what we know. If federal funding goes away or federal funding comes in and says you have to do school choice, we are in a whole new ball game with a whole new set of rules. And we will have to decide what we do then. So it is very difficult time to make decisions.
I know, I thank you, Madam Chair. There are a lot of unknowns and a lot of anxiety and, you know, I do think there's a general sense that we need to do something. I want to keep bringing it back to what Senator Chittenden said. There's a right way to do this and a wrong way, but we gotta get it, if not completely right, right? And I, very quick anecdote, long before we were building a new high school, we were gonna renovate our high school. And I was just a parent in my community and got involved in this, we call it VHS re-envisioning, and we were going out for a $70 million bond. And we had to convince our community that we needed this, and not everyone was on board. But we were really thoughtful. We gave 3 presentations in different parts of the city. We invited everyone to come. We had laptops for people to write, to type up their thoughts and questions. We gave tours of the high school so people could see what it was that we needed to change. We had data on what our heating bills were, all of that stuff. And in the end, it was like an overwhelming vote for that bond, and people came 180 degrees because we rolled it out. It was grassroots.
You had answers.
We had answers to questions, exactly. So I think we need to get to that point.
But, and first we've got to decide who's making those decisions and how are we going to, because some of these districts might need 2 elementary schools or additions on 2.
It seems like that's the first step. You gotta get the district.
We have, I will check. Education didn't meet yesterday. I don't know what they're doing. I know Representative Conlon is a longtime school board member and supporter of local school boards. So I don't think he's going to do anything really radical. But I think he's going to do something.
I think the House Education Committee is working pretty hard, and they're gonna have a proposal out pretty soon.
Yeah. And then that will go over.
Came out this morning, okay.
Yeah.
8 pages.
Oh.
All in.
And that will go to Ways and Means, and they will figure out how to
Get
pay
more
for
than that.
what he's done.
No, that's enough. That's enough. Okay, what's the?
Keep it simple.
So we will see what comes our way, and that we will do our thing. Fortunately, the House Ways and Means has all day. And they don't have teleconference. That's what I needed to tell you. Maria Royal came to talk to me.
Mhm.
We are under no obligation under the law to have a public hearing or public testimony. I guess we have to take testimony. So anyone that wishes to submit written testimony, we need to accept it, but we don't need to have a formal public hearing. So, if asked, our legal counsel says we are in our legal rights not to have a special public hearing, or he who shall remain unnamed. All right.
Wow.
All right, on that note, mic drop.
So we could go, we are adjourned.
Has that been conveyed to the person who's?
No, I have not